It is a pleasure to be in Augusta on a beautiful Sunday morning. I think this marks, of my 33 years in Georgia, my third visit to Augusta. So I haven't been here that many times. I also want to thank Gay for the invitation. We have become friends and good colleagues through our association with the Mountain and with the Southeastern Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association. And I also want to thank Chris and Joseph. They were a pleasure to work with. So this was not a difficult service to put together. I think that this year you mark about my 12th visit to a Unitarian Universalist congregation. I've been on the road a lot. And it's a pleasure to serve our congregations. I'm used to the minister not being here, not because they're teaching, but because they're on sabbaticals. So it was a pleasure to see Gay here this morning. I brought Bell Hooks into the room with us today. Bell Hooks is actually Gloria Jean Watson. She's Dr. Gloria Jean Watson, a professor, a feminist, an author. She is now a practicing Buddhist, and she's pretty well known and pretty famous. And I had the pleasure of getting to see her talk and give her presentations on Black feminist thought, on love, and on other topics when I was in Atlanta many years ago. She came to the First Existentialist. And I was sitting out there like you are when she introduced why she was writing a trilogy on love. And the reason she was doing it was because her students, while she was introducing this topic, some of them said, Dr. Watson, we don't believe in love. They said, this is nice, what you're saying, but we don't believe in love. And she thought they were just being, you know, sort of smart alecky, older adolescents doing what we did as smart, older, smart aleck, you know, adolescents to our professors. Y'all remember. And then she went on further to talk with them about it. And they actually had doubts about love. Not whether, in fact, it was around, but whether, in fact, you could even rely on something called love. Now, if you came this morning looking for a sermon on romantic love, Gay will handle that later. That's not my job as a visiting minister. And because we're talking about love, y'all are going to give me the whole hour, right, from this point forward, right? Thank you. That's sweet of you. No, when Bell Hooks examined her students' lives, they really did have doubts about whether, in fact, love was something you could believe in. Some of them had questionable relationships with their families, with the whole concept of love. They were not joking, they were not kidding. I want you to imagine entering into adulthood and not believing that love is foundational to human existence, or that we even can rely on it. Now, we, of course, are Unitarian Universalists, so we believe in love. I need an amen. Yeah. Even if you have to sort of choke it out. Because y'all, the Universalist part is all about love. Amen. So Bell was watching a generation of people come up in some pretty scary circumstances. It's also been verified in some studies that there are children and young people who have been fed and clothed cared for somewhat. But if we really raise the bar to lovingly cared for, the absences are too profound, the neglect is too profound, and we can't say that they were lovingly brought up. Researchers verifying what was said in the classroom. That breaks my heart. I wasn't brought up rich. Reverend and Mrs. Teague did what they could, and they did pretty well by us. I graduated with a private school, high school diploma. Not bad for a beautician and a warehouseman. But I knew I was loved. And I wasn't only loved at home, I was loved on the block, and I was loved at Westminster Baptist Church. I was loved by family that lived right around the corner and family that lived way over yonder somewhere. For young people, ask your parents where yonder is, or Google it. I brought her here today because I think we need to be clear about that. And Belle said, I got to write about this. She also had been in 2 failed relationships with men who just somehow couldn't handle a black feminist intellectual. And she thought she could go get a book for them to read, being an intellectual, you know. I know the men in the room are waiting on your significant others to go bring a book to you to help with the relationship. Yeah, sure. Belle, that might not have been the best strategy. But anyway, she went looking. And she couldn't find books that affirmed the relationship she wanted to be in. So she said she'd write her own books on love. So in her own words, she said, love heals. When we are wounded in the place where we would know love, it is difficult to imagine that love really has the power to change everything. No matter what has happened in our past, when we open our hearts to love, we can live as if born again. No, I'm not going to go there, but I like that she used the phrase. Not forgetting the past, but seeing it in a new way, letting it live inside us in a new way. We go forward with the fresh insight that the past can no longer hurt us. She even goes on so far to say that contrary to what we may have been taught to think, unnecessary and unchosen suffering wounds us, but need not scar us for life. Now, some psychologists are in the room about to hit me, I know. Hang in there. She says it does mark us. What we allow the mark of our suffering to become is in our hands. Not that you didn't suffer, not that it wasn't profound, not that it didn't change you, but what you do with that is in your hands, and that love could change everything. Even make you feel as though, I'm not across the street, y'all, I'm over here, born again. Pretty powerful language. She even goes and borrows one of my saints, James Baldwin, from The Fire Next Time, and writes about suffering. And James Baldwin says, I do not mean to be sentimental about suffering, but people who cannot suffer can never grow up, can never discover who they are. Now I'm going to step in some dangerous turf, and I'm a guest and I have a car, so I can get out of here real fast. Some of the problems with liberals is that we don't want to suffer for nothing. And when suffering happens, we whine bigger and louder than anybody else. And I'm guilty of it too. I grew up with all that blood and suffering and all that stuff, and I was like, no more of that. But James Baldwin says that we can't grow up unless we recognize that some part of our life is suffering. But I'm not leaving you there, y'all. I'm going to borrow from the Universalists who said, and we have access to love that leaves nobody out. And Bell said that it'll help everybody and cure anything. Amazing, isn't it? Growing up, Bell says, is at heart the process of learning to take responsibility for whatever happens in your life. To choose growth is to embrace a love that heals. I am no longer a Unitarian Universalist who wants to allow other Unitarian Universalists to wallow in our suffering and to stay unhealed for 30 and 40 years. And then take our suffering and put it on placards and go out in the street and think we're going to change the world. And we're not speaking to the people across the pew because of what happened at coffee hour back in 19... The reason I'm wearing this obnoxious color is because I loved this campaign. No, it wasn't politically correct. And we're working on it. But it said we're standing on the side of not just rationalism, but love. That some things we can't figure out and we're just gonna have to love you anyway. Like that obnoxious cousin at Thanksgiving. They gonna be there. And they sitting by the dressing. You might as well love them. I'll cut out those 4 pages. Let me see. See, I know how to make y'all nervous. Anyway. Bell says, to know compassion fully is to engage in a process of forgiveness and recognition that enables us to release all the baggage we carry that serves as a barrier to healing. I get my hair cut in the hood in Atlanta, in a predominantly African-American neighborhood where I'm planting the new church, and my barber wants to leave because he can't handle, he's brought up middle class and rural in Georgia, but he's never been around urban black folks who are in the kind of pain that some of the folks in the West End of neighborhood of Atlanta are in. And while we were standing there talking, I watched a very middle-class woman, because I know how much her dress costs. So she's not poor, and she got into a not poor car. And she is chastising the child in a uniform, so the child is going to a private school. And the F word was flying every other sentence. And I turned to him, I said, she's hurt, and she's passing her hurt on to her child, because there was nothing the child did that deserved that language. Yes, she's a mother. She needs to get the kid in order. That's the job of being a mom. But the language she was using has just taught her child something else that she doesn't want to teach her child. And she didn't even know it. And her husband, who must have been treated similar, trotted along behind. And I told him, I said, There's a lot of hurt going on, and they are passing the hurt along. Bell says that the only way we get to the healing we need is through forgiveness. And don't get me wrong, I am not claiming that forgiveness is like the good coffee out there. You don't drink it and feel good. Forgiveness is a process. But if you're not open to the process, you don't get to heal. And if you're filled with hurt, you will pass it along. Unhealed hurt gets passed along. But y'all, healing also gets passed along. If you think I am lying, go to the hospital. Find a patient who is in the bed smiling and talk to them. And see who feels better when you leave. I'm not talking about what I read somewhere. And I prayed in Pentecostal language that I can hardly stomach. Because that's what the people wanted. And I was their chaplain. And afterwards, they looked at me and said, "Chaplain, I feel so much better." It would have been so unloving for me to go, "Well, you know, as a UU, we don't believe it." No, I have 2 or 3 minutes with somebody. I'll pray in whatever language you want, baby. Speaking of praying in the language we need, why did I mention Mr. Limbaugh? Now I'm going to get back to love. Yeah, he loves his money. Anyway, I am an artist, so I do not believe in censorship. And as a black man, I'm having some confliction around what we do with misplaced Confederate memorials. Be clear, I said misplaced. You have a right to honor anybody you want to honor, but why and when and how? And so when y'all put up my statue, are they going to make you take that down? I mean, you know, statue of a black gay poet, that's pretty offensive. But the statues weren't put up to honor. They were put up to intimidate. So I think as art, they don't need to be destroyed. They need to be placed somewhere, and then they need to have books that exactly explain what they are there for. Because I don't like the idea of destruction of art. But the reason Mr. Limbaugh is in our service is not because he didn't have the right to say what he said. But y'all, if me and Chris are trying to get y'all out of here safely because there's a fire, it is wrong for somebody to come up here and say, well, you know, fire doesn't exist. They were in the process of trying to save lives in the path of the largest storm recorded in history. Now, maybe he doesn't believe in science, that's fine. But while we're trying to save lives, keep your mouth shut. His sponsors will support him the following weeks. And then it was ironic that though he does not believe in science, and this was all a hoax to sell stuff out of the grocery store, he somehow had to cancel his show and evacuate. Huh. I don't consider that love. Standing in the way of people's lives and possibly putting his listeners in danger? Because there are folks who believe him and may have been trying to decide, should I go, should I stay? Well, Rush said, and even if you survived, as a cousin of mine did, everything around you is, and you know, Mr. Limbaugh, when the water is shut off because the pumps don't work and the water is contaminated, that faucet that he described doesn't work. And you can live without food, but you can't live without fresh water but so long. So yes, he has the right for any kind of foolishness he wants to say. But timing is crucial. Timing tells you whether it's loving or not. If you've ever gotten into an argument with your significant other, you'll know that. Why did you do blah, blah, blah? Oh my God, at the wrong time. That can be like a knife. But then we had a former president put a tweet out quoting Nelson Mandela at the right time. And he said, no one is born hating another person because of the color of their skin, or their background, or their religion. People must learn to hate. If they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. 3 million people have retweeted that phrase because it's the truth. And I even think that it's a little wrong because it says you have to be taught to love. The truth is that you can go into a room with, I think, about 4-year-olds, and they love and accept you as you enter the room. By the time they're 8, they've learned all our crap. But 4-year-olds, if you're kind to them, if you meet their needs, if you're loving and caring to them, they return that love. Now, they're going to get their needs met. So I think that it should say that we can be retaught to love. Now, if the child's primary needs have not been met, then we enter into dangerous turf. Because we are humans, and there are things that we have to learn, basics. And if those basics don't come in place in infancy and toddlerhood and then young childhood, then you can have an adolescent later tell a professor, I don't believe in love. By the way, that's a very dangerous person. Because all that forgiveness I was talking about, all that care and concern, all that connection that we rely on as Unitarian Universalists, it's not innate then. So how about the most loving thing we can do is make sure that every child eats? How about the most loving thing we can do is get rid of the oppression that stops anybody from being able to care for their own children? Caring for the planet so we don't have 4 record hurricanes forming in the water that is now so much deeper than it ever was. That's loving. And we do that stuff. Let's claim that it's loving. Loving with our hands and our feet, not just our head. Oh, y'all, I'm almost finished. Shucks.
Go back to those 4 pages.
I have a small story and then I'll close. I'm not telling you about love that changes everybody but me. I went through our ministerial process, which I think y'all are familiar with since you've watched Gay go through it. It's so simple, huh? And the first time I got before our ministerial board that approves us, the Ministerial Fellowship Committee, I bombed miserably. The person you see before you wasn't even in the room. I wasn't clear about my calling, so I just messed up. And then some stuff that wasn't too loving happened between me and the committee, between a particular character on the committee and I. It was horrible. After that was over with, they gave me a number that said, you can come back, because everything on paper says that we don't know what happened. And I didn't either. I'm not used to presenting myself in that way. So they said, you come back next year. They didn't give me any paycheck in that year, but that's another story. When I got home, my colleague and dear friend Jonathan Rogers, associate pastor of the, we don't use pastor, associate minister at Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Atlanta. He wasn't at that time. Pulled me aside, said, Duncan, I'm gonna be at your house on Tuesday to help you study. He's a Harvard graduate, a lifelong UU. I said, okay, sure. Y'all, he showed up every Tuesday at 11. Never asked for a dime. Did it because he knew who I was and knew what it would take for me to get through the process. And then as the universe would have it, I followed him into church planting. He left me in it and went on somewhere else. That's another sermon. But every Tuesday he showed up to be loving. And sometimes he wasn't nice, but he was loving. Because I went back to the MFC and got my one. And I'm planting a church because Jonathan stopped by on Tuesdays to make sure I was okay. I was transformed by his love. I'm doing the ministry I want because a friend did this for me. I'm not talking about what I heard somewhere. And y'all, there are people out there waiting on us, hurt by everything going on around them, devastated, and they need some intellectuals who got heart and soul and who ain't gonna come at them with hell and fire and brimstone. The Universalists said we could love the hell out of them. And we believe in love that leaves nobody out, including Russia. Okay, I said it was a process. Huh? Love that leaves nobody out. Heals us from the inside out. And then when we're out there doing our protest and our picket lines, we can look at folks and say, you know I love you. You ain't right, but I love you. We're gonna change everything you doing wrong. But we're doing it from love. So guess what? We have already won. Belle ends her discussion with some qualifiers. She says there has to be affection, respect, recognition, commitment, trust, and care. Affection, respect, recognition, commitment, trust, and care. How about the 7 principles? They're there. We already got the stuff we need. So if we'll recognize those things and make those the primary thing, for what happens when we gather, we've already won. Thank you so much for letting me come and talk to you. It has been a joy to be in Augusta.